I always spell my last name because some people hear Hawk, and there's several different ways that could sound. You can find me on Instagram at Robyn Michelle 007 or robynmichelle.life on the internet. I'm currently building my website, so it's not published yet, but hopefully soon. I did just start working on my website because I have a book that will be published around this summer. The name of the book is going to be The Desire to Love Myself. And the reason I wrote that book is because of some of the things that I've overcame. In my first marriage, there was some verbal and mental, emotional abuse. And then after I did come out of that relationship, in my second marriage, I had my second husband had an affair. And so there was just a lot of things I had to overcome between those two situations. And I just wanted to encourage people to know that no matter what it is that we go through in our life, that there is an opportunity to overcome our difficult situations. And there's always light at the end of the tunnel.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. And that's beautifully said. One thing I want to share is that, and we discussed this in the green room in our VIP exclusive interview, right? The conversation that you and I had. And there's so many forms of abuse. And many times we focus on, at least society, anyways, putting it out there, the physical and the sexual. Because those are the ones you see, right? Like if someone breaks your arm, you see the broken arm. If someone were to abuse you in a sexual manner, you can see that in general. But the verbal and the emotional and the mental abuse, that's something that is sometimes what we can see, right? Like if we look in the mirror, you can see that I don't really feel myself today, and I don't feel as myself yesterday. So for you, when you decide to write that book, what was the genesis of you writing that book, your experiences, and what did you ultimately want people to get from what you went through?
What I want to have happen is for people to start having those conversations because, like you said, the other types of abuse are visible. People can see that. So people know what's happening, but verbal and mental abuse happens behind closed doors. So it's hidden. And I know for me, I felt like I wasn't comfortable talking about it because I didn't think that it was real sometimes, or that if I did talk about it, people wouldn't believe me because there were no signs of it. And so I want people to just be empowered to start having those conversations and seeking the help that they need, and to know that the struggles they're going through are real and that there is help out there, and that they don't have to be living in those situations where they're struggling every single day.
I spoke to someone who was trying to let everyone know what they were going through. And as you mentioned, because it's behind closed doors, and many times the abuser paints an image of them that they're the perfect person, right? Oh, he's the perfect husband. I want a husband like him. Or she's the best wife in the world. I want a wife like her. But what we need is as you mentioned, more of the conversation piece. Because I think that's what's missing. If you don't talk about it, it's not real in a sense, right? Because it's something that is hidden, it's something that's away from the eyes of the world. When you look around and you see some of the suffering of people that you come in contact with, what are your thoughts in ways that maybe we can help them express what they're going through and maybe seek some of the support that is out there?
Well, I think doing things like this, for one thing, just starting the conversation and having safe places to have those conversations, for one thing. Having more conversations, having it not be a taboo subject, having people understand that the struggles they're going through, they don't have to go through them alone, that there is help out there, finding those resources, making those resources accessible, things like that need to start happening on a larger scale.
Do you believe that we would ever reach a point where it isn't taboo and it's something that men and women can start having those conversations?
Well, I sure hope so. That's the goal. That's always the goal.
I know the goal is just to wake everyone up and say it's okay. And I have a question for you. Your experiences with this, was there what kind of support systems were in place to help you along that maybe some people aren't aware of and you want to bring light to that to better help them?
Well, like I said, when I was going through it, I didn't talk about it. And I was in my marriage for 16 years, before I just kind of had an aha moment and I decided this isn't what I want to do anymore. And I didn't, I had a couple friends who I confided in, but most people didn't know what I was going through. I was going through it alone. And it wasn't until years later when I finally started to talk about what was going on. And there were some people who I would tell, and they thought, I kind of had an inkling, but because there were no physical signs, like we said, it was a hidden thing, and a lot of people had no idea. And that's, like I said, another reason why I wanted to start having these conversations so people feel empowered to start opening up and know they're not alone, that they don't have to do it alone. Um, there may have been supports out there, but I wasn't confident or comfortable having those conversations or reaching out. I felt very isolated. And I think a lot of people who are going through this do feel isolated, um, because they don't know what resources are available.
I will agree. I will agree. I spoke to someone a few days ago and they're detailing how they were dating a narcissist. And isolation was the tactic of that person. They would isolate them away from the friends, maybe from resources. And they told me, Terrain, you will not believe the type of isolation I was experiencing. They isolated them from money. They isolated them away from the resources I mentioned and from other people. And they didn't realize it until months into that situation. And then they looked around and they're like, oh my goodness, I haven't seen my family in months. I haven't seen my
Mhm,
friends in months. I haven't been outside of this person in months. And I know many people will make the joke where, well, everyone's a narcissist, right, Robyn? Like if I'm dating you and I break up with you, oh, Trains, he's no good. Well, she's this and that. She's a bum. She's crazy. There's all these names that we have for each other. But at the root of it, you begin to understand I was abused in some way. I was not appreciated in some way. So if I were to come to you, Robyn, and say, you know what, Robyn, I saw that fantastic interview you had where you shared your story and you shared the resources that you went through. I want to make sure that I properly identify what I'm going through is a form of abuse. What are some of the signs that you can tell me to maybe identify it so I can be better prepared to make future movements like you did?
mhm. Well, uh, some of the things to think about are, is the relationship you're in, is the person that you're with, do they support you? Do they lift you up? Do they encourage you? Or are the words that they're saying, are they negative? Are they bringing you down? Do they make you feel bad about yourself? Are they isolating you from your friends, from your family, from your job? How do they make you feel about yourself at the end of the day? Are you finding yourself crying? Are you finding yourself that, walking on eggshells when they get home from work? Are you finding yourself that you're worried about how they're going to like this? How are they going to like that? Am I worried about how I look? Ask yourself those questions and talk to your friends about if you're questioning these things.
Here in Canada, we have like hotlines for those who are experiencing different forms of abuse, especially if it's like mental health, right? If it's like emotional, mental, verbal, we have something we have for kids, right? We have the kids helpful. We have other things for adults, and we have these resources that aren't gender based. I know there's that concern where you have men who are self-deleting at much higher rates than women. All right. But there seems to be different types of resources for women to maybe navigate life and combat that versus the men, right? Men suffer in silence. There's like that whole movement. And for you, when you mention the friends, which is so important, because all the men and women that I know that are suffering in this way, they're they either have a book, right? They have the gym where they're not really talking to people, but many times they don't realize how alone they actually are because they don't feel it because this person who is abusing them in this way is always around them, but they're neglecting them, right? They give them just enough, but not enough to carry forward. When you're going through your experiences now and you're writing this book detailing this, and you want to have these conversations with the men and the women out there equally, because suffering is suffering regardless if you're a man, a woman, or everything in between, right? Based on your gender. What is something that you want to make sure that they completely understand is happening to them while they're being abused? Because sometimes when we're in the suffering, we don't see how bad the suffering is.
Well, the the book was more focused on once you finally get out of that situation, moving forward and loving yourself and rebuilding yourself afterwards. So when you're in that situation, it's so hard sometimes to get out. We just because life goes on and we do day by day. I was in it for 16 years and I did it because that's what we do. I had two children and I didn't want to break up a family. And I thought, once you get married, you stay married. And time just goes on. Time goes on so quickly and we get wrapped up in our family and our life and our job and what we do. So I'm sorry, what was your question?
How do you want to help those who are in it leave it? Well, first, make sure that they understand what is
Mhm.
happening and to ultimately leave it, like you're mentioning.
So it's really hard to know when the right time is and to have that strength to make that decision, but it's really a personal decision. Um, I feel like for me, it was once I made that decision, I had peace about it. But because it is a personal decision, it's just going to have to be a choice that you make one day. Once you make that choice, you'll have peace about it. I feel like things come together. Everything has a way of working out the way they're supposed to in the end. They always do. They always will. But it's usually fear that holds us back. Um, because of change, because of being on our own, taking that step, leaving something, even positive change can be scary. So just knowing that when you're making that change and taking that step, that it can be good, it will be good, but you have to do it. You don't have to do it alone. That's a huge misconception too, that you're going to be taking this big step on your own and you don't have to.
I'll share a story with you. I dated this girl who sometimes watches this podcast. So no names, Robyn, no names. But she may try to do something to me. But
Mhm.
this was years ago. And we got into this argument on vacation. And it was at a restaurant in front of dozens of people, like many restaurants, right? You go out to a dinner and things like that. And she just erupted, dropping F bombs, swearing all these theatrics, as I like to call it. And I remember sitting there ignoring it to a degree because it's embarrassing to have a public fight, right? But then when we got back to the villa, because we were in Bali, Indonesia, and then we attempted to have a conversation because now we're in private, I realized how much of verbal abuse that I was taking towards the end of that relationship. That moment in the restaurant was basically a representation of everything that was happening in that relationship. But the difference was when it's little things or what we would call little things, it's easier to ignore. But when it's something like that, you can't ignore it. When it's something that's big, it's in your face, everyone else is around like, oh my God, is that actually happening? Then you have a choice. Either you're going to accept it, which lets the person know what their action isn't wrong, but you're not willing to leave, nor is there any consequences really to the action. Or two, you're going to make a decision and say, okay, you know what? This is my indication where I need to exit out. Because if the person is willing to do this to me, who knows how further it can go? And as you may know, there's many people that it starts from the verbal and the emotional. The physical is not that far from that. Is that something that you would agree with, where the escalation process seems to be something that we miss until it's in our face and we have to make a very difficult choice?
It's always a difficult choice. I feel like we always know in our heart what and when the right time and decision is. Like, and if you listen to your heart and you listen to your gut and you follow that, you're always going to make the right decision.
How would someone identify what is a right decision versus a not so right decision?
When, if you're doing what's true to yourself, you're going to make the right decision, if that makes sense. So if you were doing what's authentically you and true to your values and true to what you believe in, then it's going to be the right decision for you. And it's going to be in the right time. It's going to be in the right matter, and it will all come together.